everyone. Thank you for the introduction. It's so wonderful to be here today to talk to you all about one of my favorite topics, leading high-stakes infrastructure programs at scale. So I've been at Box for the past 10 years. I joined as an engineer, and then around 2 years in, I switched to the management track. And really, the past 10 years have just been a lot of crazy infrastructure programs, from building out the horizontal scalable database tier for Box and then actually scaling it over 100x, adopting new next-gen technologies, moving from monolith to microservices, migrating our production environment to a new data center. It's been a lot of pretty insane adventures. And the thing about large-scale infrastructure programs is that they're actually quite hard. The stakes are often really high. They're risky. There's a lot of unknowns. You kind of don't know what's going to happen as you go through. They're often long running, quarters or even years. And all of this can come together to create a pretty high stress environment. The good news is that as a leader, you actually have a tremendous opportunity to make this so much better for the team. And my goal today is to share my top 4 tips for how you can do that. Now, I am going to be focusing on infrastructure programs in my examples, but really these are pretty standard leadership tips. And so I'm hoping that each of you will be able to find something that you can take back with you for your day-to-day. So let's say you get asked to lead an infrastructure program. The first thing that you need to do is make sure that you're setting a clear goal. Now, you might be thinking to yourself that like, hey, this is not much of a suggestion. Obviously, we need a goal. But in my experience, this is where most programs are actually doomed for failure, because setting a good goal is really hard. The first thing you need to make sure is that your goal is actually important. Refactoring your code base to get rid of tech debt, that is not an important goal. It needs to be important to the business. So it needs to positively impact your customers, positively impact your team, positively impact your financials, right? It has to be a truly important goal. And the reason for that is that otherwise there's no way that you're going to get the resources and the focus to actually work on this. And you're not going to have the grit that's required to actually see it through all of the twists and turns along the way. The next thing you need to make sure is that you have a singular goal. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, hey, my refactoring, it's gonna improve quality and improve performance. It's gonna make our team's velocity that much higher, and it's gonna be lower cost. Don't get me wrong. One project with 4 amazing outcomes, that's a great idea. You should totally do that. But you still need to be very clear on what is the top driving goal that set you off on this journey and what are the nice to haves. And the reason for that is so that when you inevitably hit some tough trade-off, some tough decision point, you have clarity on what it is that you're optimizing for. What is the non-negotiable thing you need to deliver? And it's not just that you yourself need to be clear, you want your entire team to be aligned on this critical goal. You don't want to find, in hindsight, that one of your team members was optimizing for performance over uptime and the other was doing the exact opposite, right? Like those types of misalignments can be really difficult to discover, because usually you'll start talking about the tactics of what you're building, but everyone on the team is making micro prioritization decisions every day, and you want to truly make sure that you're aligned. So single goal. And finally, you need to make sure that your goal is concrete. So it can't be some qualitative, make something better. It needs to be concrete. It needs to be measurable. You need to know what is the thing that you are signing up to deliver. But you also want to make sure that it's ambitious enough. This is not the time to underpromise, overdeliver, right? That if you don't set the goal that you actually need, you're hampering your team's ability to push themselves to hit that. And this is actually a lesson that was pretty fundamental for me the first time I encountered it. A couple of years ago, I was asked to lead an effort to migrate our production environment to a new data center. And this was a pretty crazy endeavor. Not only do we need to set up a whole new data center with everything that goes into provisioning and validating that, at the scale that we were operating at, but the way our application was configured at the time, and also the latency difference between those two data centers, we didn't really have a easy incremental way to sort of gradually spin up traffic in the new environment. And so I honestly thought that this was an impossible program, that there was no way that we could nail this migration on the timeline that we needed and do it safely without compromising our customer experience. But it was critical. That was what we needed to do. And so we set that as our goal, figure out how to migrate without negatively impacting our customers. And the team really surprised me because they figured it out, right? And had I not set that as the goal, to some degree, we all would have been assuming that negative customer experience was going to be a critical ingredient of this. We wouldn't have even tried. And so you have to make sure that you're setting the goal that you need to hit, not the one that you think you can, to give yourself the best chance of actually getting there. Now, don't overshoot. Don't make it so crazy that it's not actually required and people are sort of not going to strive for it, but make sure that it's ambitious enough. Okay, so you've set your goal, and this brings me to my second tip, which is to de-risk by design. 100% of infrastructure programs are highly risky. There is no way around that. It's inherent, right? A common analogy is that a large-scale infrastructure program is like switching out the engine of a car while driving at 100 miles an hour. Like, that's risky no matter what you do. So what do you do about it? Don't just pad your timelines. That does not actually help you. You need to acknowledge your risks explicitly and make a plan to manage them, right? You need to document the assumptions that you're making, and you need to figure out a way, how can you validate those, and how can you validate them as early as possible? That data center migration program I just mentioned, the team came up with a hypothesis for how they thought we could build a mechanism for incrementally shifting over traffic and do it in the time frame that we had. But we weren't sure whether our site could actually sustain running in that way, and how long we could do it so that we could have ample time for validation. And had we waited until the new data center was fully built out and fully provisioned to try it for the first time, that's super risky, because we don't really know if it's going to work. And if it doesn't, now we're back to square one, but we've eaten a good chunk of our timeline. And so the team came up with a genius way of injecting latency and basically simulating the conditions of this scenario we were going to be running in, simulating it in our current data center. And that enabled us to do the test almost immediately. And that validation of the direction that we were heading in was incredibly valuable to the program. So in fact, a lot of the times, the incremental value that you're delivering in the program is not in the form of incremental impact towards your ultimate goal. It's in the form of incremental de-risking of your ability to deliver on those goals, right? So risks are expected. They're always going to be there. You're not trying to eliminate them. You're trying to manage them and prioritize de-risking them as soon as you can. Okay, so third tip, lead authentically. As I mentioned, these programs are often kind of high stress. They're complicated, they're difficult. And a lot of times you're pulling together people that might come from different sort of cross-functional areas of the organization if this program is broad and requires that involvement. And so the team members may not be used to working with each other. They may not have that established sense of trust, and they're sort of coming from their own perspectives of their home teams. And so your job as a leader is to bring them together into a high-functioning team that can actually accomplish this impossible task. The way you do that is you align the team around a shared commitment to deliver. So everyone needs to deeply understand that singular goal that you chose. They need to deeply understand why it's important, and they need to commit to figuring out how to address all of those risks and challenges and ultimately deliver that value to the business. And it's your job to set that tone in everything that you do with a team. So push back against any sort of low ownership moments like, oh, we can't do this because your thing doesn't work well enough, or, everyone needs to come together, work as a team, and commit to delivering that outcome. Now, because you're going to have to actually set a high degree of urgency around delivering and of positivity that we're going to figure this out, it's super important to cultivate psychological safety on the team. You want to make sure that if someone sees a risk that maybe hasn't been called out, or something's kind of derailing in some work that they had taken on, that they feel okay to bring that up and bring it to the team and have the team work on addressing it together. And you do that by modeling vulnerability and transparency. Yes, you're going to be talking about how confident you are in the team coming together and figuring it out, but you should actually say, here's what I'm worried about. Here are the risks that I'm seeing. Here are my concerns. Here are the things I don't understand yet, or I'm not sure about. What are all of you seeing? You have to create that environment that encourages people to speak up and be open and work collaboratively so that you can figure out these truly tough problems together. Now, sometimes the key way that you can support your team is in making the tough calls. These programs are inevitably going to hit tough decision points where the trade-offs are non-trivial, where it's hard to assess the risk, where the constraints are at odds with each other, like you can either hit the timeline but blow through the budget, or the other way around. Yes, you want to empower your team members to be autonomous and make decisions, and they're probably the experts in their areas more than you are. But sometimes when it comes down to this just, tough decision, you don't want to let your team get stuck. Make the decision, any decision, hold yourself accountable to the outcome, and enable your team to move forward. Positivity is a really strong leadership tool. If you create a shared sense of urgency and a belief that the team can figure it out, it's going to empower them to be bold and be creative and actually hit that goal that you're striving for. Okay, so this brings me to my fourth and final tip, which is owning the narrative. The broader the program, the broader your communication strategy should be. You don't want to leave a void there and let people come to their own, perhaps non-constructive conclusions on what's going on, right? But it's not just about communication for communication's sake. What you're trying to do is build trust at scale through authentic storytelling. So you want to get the story out there of what you're trying to accomplish and why is it so important, so that when you need to go and now ask for help from some team that maybe you hadn't known about in the first place, they're going to be that much more amenable to helping you because they already know what's going on and they're already bought in to this being an important direction that we're going in. You also want to be transparent about risks and setbacks. You want people to know that, yes, you're looking at this clear-eyed, you're handling the twists and turns, you're doing the right thing, and not, you don't want to oversell. Quite a few years ago by now, I was leading a relatively broad cross-functional effort that we had to increase the reliability of our database tier. Because at the time it was the number one source of downtime for us. And so we pulled together this broad program with, we took dependencies on a lot of different teams to fix various workloads that they had been sending to the database tier. So this was sort of broadly known amongst the team. And around 2 months in or so, we had the worst outage that we had had thus far. And then embarrassingly, the next day we had a repeat. And, this was potentially a really bad moment for the program. Like, do we even know what we're doing? Like, how is this so terrible? I sent out an email to the broad distribution email to everyone, which was a little bit like an incident review email, but more focused again on that narrative. And the title was, "So That Sucked," because it did. Right? You need to acknowledge that something bad happened. And so walk through what happened, used it as a reminder of why investing in database reliability was so important. Like, here's why we're making this big effort. Here's how the things we're working on will help us avoid issues like this in the future. And here's a few new learnings that we gained from this incident that we're going to pull in. It helps people understand what's going on, see you and the team as on top of it, and understand how they can support and help. Now, for your communication to actually be effective, you have to strive for clarity over completeness. And this one can be painful, right? You've put in so much work to figure out all of the details of your architecture and all of the trade-offs and all the little decisions that you made and all of the risks that you've documented and the 5 different mitigations that you have for each one and the crazy Gantt chart of every single JIRA ticket that everyone's going to work on. You have all those details, and that's crucial because someone needs to know, how you're going to make all of this work. But that's not what you need to put in your communications. It's not other people's job to digest a huge volume of information that may or may not be relevant to them and pull out the key insights and the key takeaways. That's what you need to do. And it's super hard. Clarity of communication, figuring out what that high level narrative is, requires clarity of thought. This takes time. The advantage is that it's super hard, but it's also super important. Not only will it give you a clear, compelling narrative that you can then communicate and leverage again for that alignment and trust at scale, but it also actually helps you better understand the key high-level narrative of what you're trying to accomplish that then lets you manage at that better altitude. So as an example, I still remember the annual execution plan that we had for our data center migration because it was that simple. Q1, figure out a plan, because remember, we didn't know how we were going to do this initially. Q2, validate that fancy flip mechanics that the team had come up with, as well as at the same time validate that the new data center was ready for action. Q3, flip. Q4, decommission the old one. Plan, validate, flip, decom. Now, that sounds so simple that it's silly, and clearly there was much more detail that was behind that. But having that super simple way of describing what our journey was and where we were on it not only helped us set the expectation for everyone else on where we were and what was going to happen, but also gave a really good kind of simple drumbeat for the whole team to remember where we were on that journey. So, pulling it all together, if you're venturing off on a crazy infrastructure program, make sure that you set a clear goal, that you de-risk by design, lead authentically, and own your narrative. These programs are insane, but they are tremendous leadership learning opportunities. I know they have been for me, and I hope that some of these learnings that I've gained will be helpful for you as well. Thank you for listening, and I am happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tamar, for sharing your wisdom. I thought that was fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we have several questions. Folks, if you have any other questions, or you want to upvote questions, go ahead to the side in the Q&A tab, one way or the other. And I will ask the questions on your behalf too, Tamar. So this first question is from Aiden. How do you manage teams' morale when program changes direction, scope, prioritization, mid-execution?
Yeah. Great question. And again, I think laying that strong foundation around what you're trying to accomplish and why will give you a wonderful tool for change management that inevitably happens. And almost at any level, right? Like changes can happen because, hey, one of those risks that we called out, we discovered that our initial flip approach turns out that's not going to work. Back to the drawing board, we need to make a new plan. The team understands where that came from. But even if it's a more fundamental shift, it's like, now the goal we were trying to accomplish is no longer the right goal. You'll be able to anchor it to the reasoning. We needed to deliver this type of value, but now something has changed. And so you can sort of explain how that all flows through. And so the more you have that deep clarity of understanding on what you're trying to accomplish and why, and then how you're going to go about it, when something changes in that chain, you can update the narrative and everyone's following along and it doesn't feel as disjoint for them.
Awesome. This next one from Arvind. How do you keep engineers motivated to work on tech debt related items over product features? This is like a really common one, right? When where there's delayed gratification and it's a multi-month effort.
Good question. I do think, I don't know. I really love infrastructure programs, whether tech debt or otherwise. They are kind of strange because they're successful if no one knows you did anything. Like if the website has not changed at all and none of your customers have noticed, then that's a good thing. So it's definitely a little bit different than the gratification that you get from seeing a new user experience show up. But from a technical perspective, they can be incredibly interesting and incredibly wonderful learning opportunities. And so even if you're a team that's more focused on building product, gaining that deeper understanding of the foundations that enable you to build product will then help you better understand how to improve that going forward. So it's I think the point is to not make it feel like some sad tax, oh, we have tech debt, we need to do that, but more, again, why is this important? What are we delivering? Okay, it's not going to be a new button on the page, but are we delivering better quality? Are we improving the performance? Like how is this going to impact the business and our customers? And also, why is this going to be an interesting project for us to work on as engineers? Like, what are we going to learn and gain from this in our careers individually?
I appreciate that you have excitement about that, and maybe having experience with infrastructure and managing a team focused on infrastructure, that's a very good thing that you have that. But what I see also is that there's kind of an implicit acknowledgement that there are people who have a natural excitement in that regard, and maybe said people are actually really great folks to work on that kind of thing. And if not, what you're kind of alluding to, right, is the kind of create the excitement by demonstrating the value. Makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely.
This one from Courtney. You mentioned push back against low ownership moments, like when someone says something isn't possible because another team owns X. Can you share an example of how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be empathetic. Look, a lot of times, especially at the beginning of a program like this, or in a tough moment, people are stressed. If your production environment is falling over all the time, like no one wants that to be their fault, right? Or if the program is derailing, again, no one wants that to be because they were late. And so I think the idea is to come from it, not from a judgmental place, but from a place of empathy and understanding, and saying like, yeah, but sort of taking it away from the individual and making it about the team, right? If one part of our program is delayed, that's all of our problems, right? Shut down the conversation on whose fault it was. I can't tell you how many times it says like, hey, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Let's focus on what we're going to do about it. Let's focus on understanding what's going on, and let's focus on what we're going to do about it. And it's also important that when you have a positive moment, you make that about the team, right? Like we had a win. It's not always easy to manufacture, but if you can create like little win moments for the team, especially early on, that can really shift the dynamic from, oh my God, we're on this sinking ship and everything is so terrible, to like, wait a minute, this seems to be going in a good direction. And now I want to be a part of it and I want to be associated with this effort. So I think it's approach it with empathy, understand that this is risky, and people do want to feel that they're not failing. So make it not be a personal thing, stretch it out to always be about the team, and find a path for how the team is going to together get to a good place.
I love the empathetic approach, and you're mentioning earlier psychological safety as well. And I think a lot of us have seen like, the Google research on in that regard. And I appreciate you setting that example, because I think a lot of new managers, right, they come in kind of expecting to kind of be your manager, and it turns out that just being a real empathetic, vulnerable human being makes it safe for others. So I appreciate you expressing that. This next question from Alan is, how do you deal with an engineer who often loses focus of the goal and spends time ineffectively?
I mean, some of it is individualized coaching, for sure. And so it kind of depends on where they are on their journey. I think a pattern of this that I've seen, why is the person losing focus? And so I think even thinking back to myself, when I was venturing off on that first big project that I did at Box, building out our sharding architecture, you're kind of diving into the guts of the code base, and you're seeing so many terrible things, and your mindset is like, hey, I'm already in here. I really want to make it perfect. It's like, here's these, 500 other terrible things that we really should fix if we're in here. And sometimes you get this sense, I've definitely had experience with a lot of engineers over the years where if you tell them to not do those things, it's like, wait, you're not letting me deal with the tech debt. You're not letting me do the right thing. And it's not about that. So for me, like both the personal learning as well as the learning as a manager is, if we look at it through the lens of good engineering, this is not some kind of like big management, you got to stick to your timeline. It's more, what is the right engineering thing to do? And the right engineering thing to do is to deliver, to be ruthless about de-risking and delivering incremental value. And so the more you let scope creep come in, the longer it's going to take you to deliver step one of value, and the riskier it is that that's even the right thing to do. And so, yeah, document everything that you find that's a problem, and we should still, prioritize when's the right time to come back and do it. But like letting yourself get derailed is actually bad engineering, even through that lens of like striving for an idealized perfect architecture. And so I had to realize that, pulling in this completely unrelated thing about our database syntax, the API, the syntax of the API that was not related to sharding in any way, would have increased a ton of scope and a ton of complexity, and would have actually stopped us from successfully delivering the value. So back to, you got to have a really clear understanding of what is the thing you're solving for and why, so that you can help coach people on the team to be able to employ that same ruthless prioritization for themselves, again, through an understanding that this is what lets you deliver good value as an engineer. Like, it's not about some outside priority. It's just, this is the right way to ship code incrementally and not all at once.
Great. Paul's asking, how do you prepare your team to face a critical failure in the system, if ever?
I'm not sure if this is related to like face the possibility of failure, or what to do when a failure actually happens.
Probably both irrelevant.
Probably both irrelevant. Yeah. So I mean, possibility of failure, again, you kind of got to recognize on day one, hey, we're on a crazy path. We're going to do everything we can to de-risk, but there could be setbacks. And if there are, we will learn from them and we will move forward. So it's sort of acknowledging that we're going to set a high bar for ourselves. Like, it's not that we take that lightly, but also it could happen. And that just means that we'll have to take those learnings into consideration and move forward. And I think the more you're thoughtful about, again, what are the risky steps and how can you, there's a lot of content out there on how you can de-risk, deploying complex infrastructure changes and sort of making them incrementally. Like, I would say a rule of thumb is you should probably be spending roughly equal amount of time designing the end state you're shooting for as and the process of getting there, like what your incremental deployment is going to be. So planning for it, but also acknowledging that setbacks could happen. And then if an incident does happen, then again, focus your team on resolution, getting the system back to be stable, and then following up with the learnings and reassessing, okay, what do we learn from this setback that we have? How do we feed that into the rest of the path that we're on? And then also, how do we communicate our learnings broadly? Because remember, you gotta own the narrative too.
Excellent. This one from Julian. What is your definition of a high-performing team? Or even the elements, what are the things that you see?
Yeah, collaborative, high ownership, and motivated by what they're coming together to deliver, like working on something meaningful. I think ultimately that's what we all want to do. We want to have a good team. We want to operate as a team, and we want to deliver value. And so I think that would be my definition.
Excellent. Well, I can't think of a better way to end. It was Tamar, lovely to chat with you, and lovely to hear your wisdom about navigating all of the uncertainty that is, building infra with teams, et cetera. I imagine a lot of folks got a lot of wisdom from that. So I want to thank you again and wish you a wonderful rest of your week.